Mac is a 4-year-old, 16-2 hand-high thoroughbred ex-race horse. He is bred from Royal Applause and Bassinet. During his racing career, Mac was trained by O'Meara and ran in 8 flat races, with his career which ended in December of 2016. In 2017, Mac was purchased by a riding school where he was ridden for 10 months inconsistently, before behavioural issues caused him to be turned away for 3 months. Mac had been lunged and long-ranged for about 2 weeks before this training programme took place. The main goals with Mac were to develop muscle, improve response to aids, and to be able to walk and trot under saddle. When assessing Mac's static conformation, a body condition score was taken. The body condition score given to Mac was a 2.5 out of 5 using the Carolyn Huntington scale that was developed in 1988. Looking at the image with the white lines from the point of shoulder to the withers and along his back and to his hips, they are roughly equal in length to his neck. This indicates that Mac has a balanced conformational base to work from and develop on. Despite having a well-proportioned appearance and many indications that he is well balanced, a conformational fault was found when assessing his static conformation. This was that the length of his top line was longer than that of his underline, shown by the red line in this image. This suggests that Mac would have a weak back, which will not be well muscled and needs developing in order to support the length of his back, and will have negative effects on his performance due to it being difficult for him to use his hind limbs correctly by bringing them underneath his body when working. This then has a knock-on effect on impulsion and power, by decreasing the power that he is able to exert through paces. This conformational fall will always also lead to the horse loading his front limbs, meaning that less power is exerted throughout all paces, and the movement of the horse is and is felt as harsher to the rider. The use of the forelimbs and lack of impulsion from the hinds can be seen during the dynamic assessment of this horse as shown later in this video. The horse's head has a large impact on the animal's ability to balance, as it acts as a pendulum aiding to balance the horse during locomotion. Mac has a well-proportioned head in proportion to the rest of his frame. This is important due to the fact that in comparison to other animals, equines have one of the heaviest heads in proportion to the neck. As shown through the white lines on this image, the length between Mac's poll and between his eyes is roughly half the distance of that between his eyes and his nostrils. These proportions are considered correct. When assessing Mac's conformation both statically and dynamically, it is clear to see the lack of muscle build up on both sides, meaning that he is underdeveloped and therefore unable to perform to his full potential both under saddle and on the ground. This is one of the key areas that is aimed to be targeted and improved through this training programme. In the first week of training, Mac was assessed in loose side reins on the lunge. Trainer Will Fairber from Art to Ride says that side reins should be loose so that they only come into action when the horse tries to move their head position all the way up, and should allow for the horse to freely move his head in front of the vertical should he wish to. They should not fix a horse into a false outline or place him behind the vertical, as this is incorrect and could lead to a break at the third vertebra. It was seen during lunging that Mac was very unbalanced and he would often rush and slow within paces, and he was not very reactive to the handler's whip or vocal aids. Mac was also hand-walked in order to vary his work. Pippa Funnell and Kate Green say it's important to the young horse's mental state to keep their work varied, to keep them thinking during work in order to prevent them going stale. Working a horse in hand can also aid in training various parts of the German scales of training, such as suppleness, impulsion, and straightness. It is important to consider the scales of training when training a horse for any discipline. In week 2, it was decided to lunge Mac in a bungee training aid as opposed to side reins. This was due to the fact that the bungee creates a more giving and elastic contact on the bit as opposed to side reins. The bungee is often used in order to improve the horse's suppleness throughout paces and over the back, as it creates a rounded outline, which was beneficial to Mac for strengthening his weak back and developing his top line and building up muscle. As seen in these clips, you can see that Mac lowers his head a lot more in the bungee. as when he rises his head, the bungee pulls against himself. Within this training session, Mac also became more responsive to aids after becoming used to the handler's aids and voice commands. In the third week of training, Mac was again lunged within the bungee training aid due to the success of the previous lunging session and its positive impact on the horse's way of going. It was hoped that the training aid would aid in strengthening Mac's weak back as well as developing much needed muscle over the horse's top line and core. During this week, Mac was also loose-schooled. Loose schooling allows the horse to work freely and develop understanding for the handler's vocal and body language cues. It's hoped that this would improve Mac's responsiveness to aids from the handler. Loose schooling allows the animal to work independently, which can also be beneficial to the learning process of young horses like Mac. Week 4 saw Mac introduced to being worked in the saddle again. During this week, Mac was lunged with his saddle on. It is recommended by Beisner and Cook to lunge ex-race horses in the saddle as opposed to a roller, in order to create a supple back. The pressure of the saddle and the increased weight of it can stimulate this suppleness being created. As seen in these clips of Mac lunging, he had become more responsive to the handler's body language and cues to move forwards. This showed a clear improvement from previous weeks. During this week, trot poles and raised trot poles were introduced during lunging. Poles can be beneficial for many reasons. The main reason poles were introduced for Mac were to encourage him to focus on his pace as well as to improve his balance and develop core muscles, as well as encouraging hoof and eye coordination. Using poles also develops the straightness area on the scales of training. In week 5, Mac again was hand walked. On this walk, it was worked on to get him in a long and low frame. This would develop his muscles over his back, and it kept his work varied and stopped him going stale by working in the arena all the time. Later on in week 5, Monty Roberts' drawing up was also used with Mac. This was in order to get him responsive to the handler's body language and verbal cues. It was hoped that this would aid in his ridden and lunging work later on. With Mac becoming a lot more responsive to the handler's aids, it was decided to do raised trot poles on a lunge again in week 6. This was in order to further develop Mac's proprioception as well as to develop his core muscles and muscles over his back. This was also in order to vary his work as he seemed to enjoy pole work. Due to the clear improvement in Mac's muscle development, it was decided in week 7 to ride him in walk and trot under saddle. During this analysis, it was seen that Mac was slow in responding to aids, but he was also slightly lame. Due to this, the session was cut short and he was only ridden for a couple of minutes. He was then seen via physio before the following week's session. Due to several behavioural indicators of pains and tension seen within these clips, such as tail swishing and shortening of strides, it was decided that Mac should be visited by the physio before any other work was done, as I did not want to be riding him while he was in pain. It was also felt that the saddle did not fit Mac correctly, and this should be assessed again before he was ridden under saddle. Due to these issues, week 8 was pushed back a week while he was seen by the physio. After the previous session, Mac's saddle fit was assessed and refitted, and he was visited by a physio who worked over his back and his left side where he was sore. He was then ridden in a bungee in week 8. This was due to the fact that in previous lunging sessions, the bungee was seen to improve Mac's way of going and develop him in a long and low shape, which was wanted and desired. Mac's tail was swishing a lot less during this session, and it was seen that he was in a lot less pain and his strides were a lot larger than before. This indicates that the physio was much needed and that it had improved how he was feeling, and he was in a lot less pain during these sessions. After warming up, the bungee was removed, and it was seen that Mac's head position remained lower than how it was at the beginning of his sessions. This was desired and how far the trainer wanted to go with the horse. He was seen in walk and trot and did plenty of transitions with his head in this position. It was also desired as this would develop his muscles further if this riding was continued. As with any training program, there were many limitations to this project. To begin with, Mac's lameness caused issues where several sessions had to be missed out while he was recovering from being slightly lame. There was also the issue of saddle fit, which caused a week's delay in training, whilst we waited for the saddle to be fitted correctly and readjusted to ensure that Mac was able to move fully underneath the saddle and was not limited by the fit of the saddle or in pain. There were also moments of backwardness within training sessions, which was expected due to Mac being only 4 years old. The final and most limiting factor was that Mac was sold a week before the training programme was due to finish. However, the goals were met, so this was not too much of an issue.